Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So with us today, we are pleased to have our featured special guest, Dr. Rich Gasaway. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm glad we were able to make this happen. So with that, introduce yourself to the listeners, a little bit of a background, who you are, what you do, like I said, what you've kind of done in the past, just a general, what's the scoop on Rich?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I spent 33 years serving as a first responder and held just about every position you can in an organization: firefighter, EMT, paramedic, lieutenant, captain, assistant chief, training officer, fire chief. And I did that in 3 different organizations, one in my hometown just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, one in a community that bordered Akron, Ohio, and then my final stop off was in Roseville, Minnesota, which is where I live now. And I retired in 2009, and you know this story already, Dave. This is for the benefit of your
retired-ish.
So in 2004, in my mid-40s, when maybe somebody having a midlife crisis would buy a red convertible and put the top down and drive around with a big smile on their face. I didn't do that. I went back to school and got a Ph.D. in neuroscience and did research on situational awareness and high-risk decision-making. And what drove me to do that was how many first responders that I saw that were getting hurt and killed because of issues related to their situational awareness, which then was a contributing factor to poor decision making, which led them to physically do things that were getting them hurt and killed. So I spent 5 years doing that. And when I finished that, little did I know that the things that I uncovered in doing that would become so sought after that I ended up leaving the fire service. And, some would say retired. I mean, I was 33 years, you could call it retirement, but I wasn't quite of retirement age. So I guess I would say I quit and started teaching these classes, mostly to first responders. And then, funny thing happened along the way. Industry found me.
Oh,
and real quick, but funny story was of the first company that outside of public safety that contacted me. They said, we're this company in Tennessee, and we have been to your website, and we like the things that we see, and we think you could help our employees, and we'd like to engage you in teaching situational awareness for our employees. And I said, well, I don't really teach for industry. I teach first responders, so I'm not sure that I can help you. I said, what do you do? And they said, well, we downblend weapons grade uranium to a level, a grade of uranium that powers the nuclear navy. And I'm thinking, oh, great. If I mess this up, there's going to be a hole where Tennessee used to be. So instead of agreeing to teach classes for them, what I got them to agree with was to let me come down and visit.
Oh, nice.
See what they do, observe their observations. And from that observation, I would tell them whether I thought I could help them. Well, I was absolutely stunned at how strong the connection is between what their issues were and what my program taught. It was like, oh, it all makes sense. I had this like blind spot, Dave. I didn't see what I was teaching of having any value for anybody outside of, the public safety arena.
Right.
And boy, did my eyes get opened wide to that. So I did programs for them for 3 years. And then some other business and industry started contacting me. So now what I do, my company does, is we teach situational awareness and high-risk decision-making for first responders still, but also for businesses who, the ideal fit is organizations whose employees make high risk, high consequence, time compressed decisions with changing conditions. And if they get it wrong, there could be a consequence. Now, the consequence I most focus on to try to avoid is the worker getting killed.
Yeah.
But it also could mean an injury. It could mean a near miss, or it could mean that the company, that as a result of a bad decision, the company experiences a great financial loss, or a loss of their company reputation, or a loss of customers. So it isn't all just blood on the ground kind of essay and decision making.
Right.
It started that way, but it has evolved to be much broader in base now, and the opportunities that have come my way, our way, is indescribable to me.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's my background.
Well, if you think about it, one, I was laughing like, oh, I didn't take the red convertible. I signed up for a beatdown, right? Because I mean, I know exactly what beatdown that is, right? So I'm with you. But I didn't take the red convertible either. But
Yeah. Maybe we should have.
we probably should have. We've both been happier. But but I will say that when you think about it, I mean, you've got mining, you've got oil rigs, you've got high tensile power lines. I mean, you've got so many. I mean, I could just, when you made that description, you could just all of a sudden industries just start popping in your mind where pipelines. I mean, there's just so many things that people can easily get hurt and killed if they're not paying attention, knowing what's going on, keeping awareness of what's things that are around them, and yeah, I could see tons of where industry related would be. Hey, this is important. Well, what I thought you were going with that, and I'm going to tease you a little bit on this one, was obviously being in fire and EMS for so long, people know, okay, not as long as you, but let's just say nobody brags about having a big checkbook in fire and EMS. Hey, I can pay you all this money to do it. So, hey, what got me to come to industry? A big check. Like, what did they have that the fire department didn't have? Money. Okay, well, let's talk.
Since we're being so authentic, along the way while I was teaching this for fire and EMS and a little bit in policing, there would always, because there's volunteers in those industries, fire and EMS volunteers, not so much in policing, but they would say, well, my full-time job is in this company or in this industry, and what you teach is as valuable to us in my full-time job as it is, in my vocation as a firefighter. You should teach a class for, XYZ.
Interesting.
And I resisted. And the reason I resisted, Dave, and this is going to sound terrible from a perspective of somebody who runs a company. I resisted because I knew if I got outside of the fire service, that industry and business would pay so much better that I was afraid that I would abandon the fire service and chase the dollar, where money could be made. And
understood.
So instead of abandoning public safety, I just expanded to get more trainers. So now we can handle the demand for both. And I feel better about that because, public safety, having been in the business for pretty much my whole career, is a special place in my heart, and I really don't want any worker getting hurt or killed, but I especially don't want a first responder getting hurt or killed.
No, and I'm sure you did some research on it and looked into it and probably did a little bit of probably some of your research was on this, but I remember when I was at the Portsmouth Fire Department, I remember a friend of mine and I had just gotten off shift, and he was an auto mechanic, and we had gone back to my house, and we were, I don't know, put a new alternator in my car or something, whatever. And we got in his vehicle, and we both went up to Advanced Auto Parts in Chesapeake to go get an alternator. Right at the same time that the first engine companies were pulling in on that Advanced Auto Fire from back in the 90s. Yes. And we were out in the parking lot and watched the entire thing.
So for the benefit of your listeners, tell them what happened.
Well, this was, I believe, a case of situational awareness gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, firefighter died.
Two.
Yeah, two
Yeah, the
firefighters.
team did. Yeah, two of them died.
Yep.
And that was not. There's never a. It's never pleasant going to a firefighter's funeral ever. But especially two in a row like that was horrible. But basically, they got in. They were first on scene. There was just a lot of issues and awareness that it was a truss roof, a metal truss roof. The fire had gotten in there and kind of escaped. There was a lot of issues where there was a lot of heavy HVAC stuff on the roof. Of course, the fire is weakening that. They couldn't really see a whole lot of it. Communications were a nightmare as far as on the radio. You also had the ladder truck that come in there, and they went, at a 45 to the building, and while the guys were in there, they were just dumping water straight on the roof, which obviously didn't help matters any as far as the collapse with the fire being in there and everything else. So it was just, obviously this was before there was, RIT teams, before there was backup, before there was the 2 in, 2 out. It was, okay, there's a fire, go in and put it out, and honestly with Portsmouth, we were pretty aggressive fire department. So even when it was that case, if there was an actual life safety thing, I knew agencies that were like, I don't care what's going on, nobody goes into the 2 are out here. And I know some that are like, okay, the guys are on the way. There's somebody there that you can pull out. There's an immediate life safety threat right here. Take your best risk analysis and make your best judgment, Captain. But it was a tragic situation. And after finding out what happened, because we were there, we obviously we never got the alternator. We were there just for hours during the whole scene, just watching the whole thing. And then when we found out what had happened afterwards, because we knew a lot of the command staff that were there, so we were there, not far from there, kind of watching and talking and just seeing how everything kind of went down. And really bad situation. And that was this for not being on duty that day. It doesn't substitute for, oh my God, you were actually on the engine or on one of the ladders or on one of the pieces of apparatus there, but just coming off a shift and basically getting there when the first engine rolled up and they first went into the building and basically watching it all the way until they relieved all the city crews, and it was all mutual aid crews at that point, and they'd gotten them out and, had done the recovery and everything else. That was going back the next day to the station and say, holy crap, Chief, guess what? Amos and I just saw yesterday, especially since it was all over the news, right? We were there. That was wild. And like I said, that was tough going to those 2 funerals. So I can absolutely understand if there's anything you can do to help prevent that type of thing, 100%. And yes, and amen.
Yeah. That little side story that I got invited down to Chesapeake County to do situational awareness classes for them. Well after that event.
Yeah.
And I had known about that event, but it had, I study so many line of duty deaths reports that I don't always remember exactly where they happen at,
right,
as much as I remember what happened. So I was familiar with what had happened, but I wasn't familiar with the fact that it had happened there. So I'm teaching the class, and somebody in the class says, well, this sounds a whole lot like the advanced auto parts store fire and the things that happened there.
Yep.
And then I had to play like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, you don't know. And I'm like, no, I guess I don't. And then they started to talk about it. I'm like, oh, that happened here, because then all the dots connected. And so they've had me back twice, and they enrolled all of their members in my online academy.
Nice.
Because when I taught the class, it was just for like officers,
right?
And then they realized everybody needs to have a baseline understanding of situational awareness. So not only did they enroll everybody, but everybody they hire new now goes to the academy, the online academy. Yeah. So
nice.
For those 2 firefighters that died, it did not happen in vain. That they are taking some of those lessons very seriously and making some changes in the organization to ensure things like that don't happen again. And that, you and I both know, that's the best that we could hope for an outcome, is that it doesn't just get pushed aside and dismiss like, well, it's a dangerous profession, and people are going to die doing this, and instead of saying, let's work hard to not let this happen again. And that's where Chesapeake has been.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, there is some truth in that, and I mean, there are a lot of dangerous professions. It's not just running into burning buildings or having people shoot at you that's dangerous. There's a lot of things that can take you out of this world, and that you need to be on your A game. But right. You're absolutely right. It's probably, if there is a tragedy, the best you can hope for is what policies, procedures, training can we put in place to have the best chance of ensuring that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, when I tell folks, I say, you do dangerous work. A lot of things can kill you. Let's make sure it isn't flawed situational awareness in your decision making. It could be something else. Like I'm sure you're very familiar with this. Near miss that just happened in Chicago between the Southwest Airlines and the commercial airline that was taxiing across the runway, and he did a go around.
The Delta.
So if you listen to the audio, which they've been playing on the news, the tower gives a series of instructions to the private jet that's going to cross the runway.
Right.
The pilot on the private jet does something called call and response, which is to say the tower says something, and then the pilot or co-pilot, whichever one was on the radio, is supposed to call back what the instructions were. Well, when they call back the instruction, they don't say stop short of the runway. So then the tower comes back and says, no, you have the instruction wrong. It's this, and stop short of the runway. So then the person on the radio says, okay, copy this, and stop short of the runway. But then they don't. They still cross the runway. Even though the first time they missed it, the second time they acknowledged it, and then they continued to do it anyhow, human error.
Yeah.
But my classes help people understand how that happens, why that happens, and how to prevent that from happening. Now, the pilot on the Southwest airline coming in on their landing is doing everything right. It's not their fault if that private jet is on their runway and there's an incursion. The Southwest flight, in fact, strong essay to the pilot on the Southwest flight for seeing that private jet was not following the instructions, because I'm sure he heard it too, because they're probably on the same channel. When you go to different channels at different points of your landing or your proximity to the airport. So I'm sure he heard it, but then he saw that he didn't stop, and then he did the go around. And if the pilot on the Southwest flight would have presumed that if the instruction is repeated, it's going to be followed.
Right.
Then he would have not really been probably as dialed in on watching for that jet to cross his runway. But he didn't trust that they were going to do what they said, which is, I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
and allowed him time to pull up and do a go around. But
it's funny you talk about the near miss. I mean, it's, at the time of the recording, we're talking about it has not been that far out. What, a month or so from the tragedy at Reagan National?
Yep.
And as far as you talk about repeating instructions, and I saw several pilots do some really good in-depth, here's the recordings, here's the radar, here's the stuff, here's, some analysis on what it was. And it was pretty sharp. I mean, I think they had done a pretty good job of breaking down second by second kind of what was that. But I mean, man, it's just, tragedy doesn't even start to, when you're talking about something like that, especially for the, for the plane coming into land, that's, like you said, trying to do everything right.
Yeah. Aviation is, of all the industries, medicine and aviation probably do the best at teaching true situational awareness and communication skills to develop and maintain strong situational awareness, especially between air traffic control and the flight decks. But still yet, tragedy happened. And I have no opinion on how or why until I see more of the details of the report.
Exactly.
I'm not the person that watches the TV coverage and says, "Oh, I know what happened here." No.
Normally, that's the fool right off the bat. Like I said, after seeing some of the in-depth analysis from the pilots, even then, it's just like no one's going to know until they get the black boxes. No one's going to really know. He said, but from looking at the radar, listening to the radio, listen, everything there, here's at least what we know so far. Same thing, like no judgment, but at least it was an expert analysis. But you're absolutely right. It's somewhere between closed loop communication and the checklist manifesto. Like I said, medicine and aviation has done a decent job of trying to eliminate some of the issues. And when I interviewed Mike Guberman a few months back, and we were talking about Mount Weather. And I think he worked up there before or whatever. It's kind of like the plane crash where the world discovered, oh, Mount Weather exists. So, I mean, I think it was 67, and they basically, they kept telling them to pull up, and anyway, they flew right into the side of Mount Weather, coming into, from like the West Virginia, Ohio area to, going into Dulles, I believe they were. It was either Dulles or Reagan, but they were coming west to east in that direction and right into the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
Which, same thing. Hopefully, luckily, they're few and far between. It's statistically still the safest way to travel, but when it goes wrong, it's not like you're just pulling over to the side of the road with a flat.
Right. That's right. Yeah. If the tragic events are the headline. If the traveling public knew how many near miss and near runway incursion events there are every month of the year, and NTSB I think has this on their websites for people to go and see how many reported events there are per month, and there's history over years of it.
Yeah.
It would scare you to say, holy cow, I want to hear about, the plane that flips upside down in Toronto, or the significant near miss in Chicago, or the actual, tragic plane crash at Reagan. But, so they've heard about 3. There's probably been close to 100 others avoided, but yet elevated to be reportable as a near miss or less than tragic event. And it wouldn't even hardly ever make the news. I mean, there's been a couple here recently where planes have had to return because of smoke in the cockpit.
Oh, wow.
So that would, there was one that was going to Sydney, Australia, and then I think the other one had to return to Atlanta. Where was it going? I don't remember. Anyhow, two within the last 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Of smoke in the cockpit.
Well, at least if nothing else, they've kind of, I don't necessarily want to label it with the just culture label, but at least they've got it to the point where you can record, you can report these, and it's not, okay, well, my career is over because I reported a near miss. Like, what can we learn from this and keep going on?
Well, aviation really figured that out when they made the aviation safety reporting system. The way to get people in aviation to report their near misses is they gave them immunity from discipline. So you can't get anything closer to a just culture than to give somebody immunity from discipline, so long as they weren't willfully negligent in the performance of their duties. In other words, if they didn't follow a policy and they said, I didn't follow that policy because I think it's a stupid policy, they're not exempt from discipline.
Yeah, willfully.
If they didn't follow the policy because they were doing something that made sense, that prevented them from being able to follow the policy, then aviation says, well, we want to learn how and why that happened and keep it from happening again. So they give them this immunity from discipline so that they can build a database of how these things happen across all aspects of aviation, so they can learn from it and make aviation safer.
Yeah, and it's funny you talk about just culture from an EMS aspect. I was interviewing a gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about it's like the pendulum swing too far one way, too far the other way, and there's got to be a happy medium in the middle. There's still stupid people that do stupid things or willfully do something they shouldn't, and human error or just being an idiot, right? But like I said, on one end of it, we were joking about, figuratively speaking, of course, because like I said, it's going out. But the culture used to be, all right, one paramedic makes one mistake, one time in his career. And from a figurative disciplinary aspect, it's almost like you drag him out of the town, in the middle of the town square, and empty a disciplinary clip into him, and his career is over for one stupid mistake, you know. And at some point, on the other hand, it's like, oh, well, nobody makes a mistake. It's always the system under process. And we didn't put an 8.5 by 11 sticker on the 1-inch epi bottle to make sure that they knew this was 1 to 1,000, not 1 to 10,000. It's like, oh, come on. Don't be ridiculous. You know, at some point, like you said, if it's willful, malicious, or just, you know, I purposely bypassed the safety systems, well, then you need to be in trouble, right? But so I think there's a happy medium with that, but it is nice on the aviation end of it that they have the ability to be able to report, and I said people can learn from it as long as it's not malicious.
No, it's they've done a really good job of not making it punitive when the error was done. The best way I could describe it is the person's heart was in the right place, but they still made an error. And I think that's really is what is in play for this near miss incursion that was in Chicago. You know, you have the tower tell the crew something, they don't acknowledge it.
Right.
The tower says, no, that wasn't what I said. I said this. And then the crew acknowledges it. And then the crew still crosses the runway. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to say, well, that crew, I know why that crew crossed the runway, because they didn't care another plane was coming in, and they didn't care if they got hit. Well, no. I mean, you see how silly that sounds when it's said like that?
Yeah,
of course they care, you know, or they're on a suicide mission or whatever. No. Of course they care, but there was still human error there.
Yes. Well, how many times do we hear something repeated back, and it's just, you get so used to saying and doing something, it's like it's in one ear and out the other, and you don't even, I said it, but it's like it doesn't even register that I said it.
Dave, and I know we're off topic here with what we're here to talk about, but I had a client that I was working with. It was an industrial client. They had an employee that got killed in a warehouse because a forklift backed over them and killed them. And so that scored me an invitation to come down and help them to figure it out and provide some training. And they said they couldn't figure out how this could happen, because those forklifts, by their description, have a annoyingly loud alarm when the forklift is backing up. I
know where this story is going, but keep on, sir.
And I said, well, what if the person who was walking behind the forklift didn't hear the alarm? Oh, that's impossible. Come with us. We'll take you out. They take me out to the warehouse. And sure enough, the alarm on that forklift is obnoxiously loud. I mean, I don't know the decimal count, but it was loud. They said, it's impossible that somebody couldn't hear that alarm. So I said, okay. So we walked over to one of the employees that works in that area regularly. And I said, when the forklift is backing up, do you hear the backup alarm? And they said, no. And then I turned to the safety guy and I said, now, you want to learn why? You know, because you're fresh into this environment and that alarm going off is a novel experience for you, the safety guy.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the people who are continually exposed to that alarm don't become desensitized to that sensory input and turn it off. Just like people who live near railroad tracks don't hear the trains going over the tracks when they're sleeping at night.
Nope.
But everybody else who might be staying at the hotel hears it because they're not used to it. And, so they wanted to fry the forklift operator.
Oh.
And they said the forklift operator is supposed to turn around, look behind him, and see that there is nobody there. And I said, well, what did the forklift operator tell you? They said, well, he said he looked behind him and he didn't see anybody. I said, do you think it's possible that the forklift operator could turn around, expect not to see somebody, and therefore not see anybody because his mind's eye already had him believing you've turned around 99 times with nobody there. You're going to turn around this time and there's going to be nobody there. And it's already pre-programmed that he's not going to see somebody, even if his eyeballs see them. Yep. And they're like, no, that's not possible. I said, okay, when I teach the
watch this.
When I teach the class, come on in. and because I don't know what it is about people thinking that humans are not fallible to these kinds of errors of not seeing things and not hearing things, or saying things but not even realizing what you're saying, like the call and response of that pilot. It's all in play, especially under stress. It's all in play.
Well, if you think about it, I've got hearing protection in, I've got the hearing protection over that, right? I'm listening to 1,000 of these a day. It's no different than alarm fatigue in a hospital, whether it's a ventilator, an IV pump, whatever. You just hear it so often, it just blends into the background. And
That's right.
what do you mean you didn't?
That's
how
right.
can you figure out what's important and what's not when that's all you hear all the time?
That's right.
Like I said, there's 50 forklifts running in that warehouse. You got beepity, beepity, beepity all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. You know, one more beepity beep is not going to make a difference with all your PPE on in the warehouse floor.
That's right.
Exactly. Yep. So,
and the employee he hit and killed didn't have PPE on because she was walking from one building through this building, and there's a walkway for employees to, their safe walkway. So she wasn't just haphazardly walking through the warehouse. They actually have a designated walk, but she didn't have PPE on because she was leaving. It was the end of her shift. She was going home. So she didn't even have PPE on as she was cutting through the warehouse. All the more reason I'm thinking that there's no way she couldn't hear it. And I'm like, well, I said, when she was she leaving just for the day? And they said, well, no, when she was leaving, she was going on vacation. Mm-hmm. Oh, so she might have had vacation on her mind, causing her to not really be paying attention to her surroundings. And they're like, could that happen? I said, yeah, come to class.
Could that happen?
You're gonna get your mind filled with things that you don't want to believe. I'll tell you that. No one wants to be told how fallible they are as humans to err.
Yeah. And it's surprisingly, when you just do a skosh of digging, how fallible we are, especially if you've been around that environment. And like I said, it's whether it's pass alarms, IV pumps, ventilators, backup alarms, it doesn't matter. Like I said, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. That here's the safe passageway, but like I said, one is obviously an error for him crossing into that safe passageway. But same thing, you're hearing this 1,000 times, and obviously even just being on the floor, period. The safety guy's like, well, even if she was leaving for today, leaving for vacation, on the floor, no PPE, a whole lot of bad mojo just for that right there, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's a good spot. Let's go ahead and wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We will start back up with our second segment, and we will jump headlong into our questions. So we will see you in a bit. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We are here with special guest, Dr. Rich Gasaway, and we are talking all things situational awareness and leadership, and we're going to jump straight into our first question. So, Rich, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
I made a couple of bullet points because there was just a small number of things that I wanted to make sure that I covered instead of just shooting from the hip here.
Okay.
But I think one of the things that in an organization that establishes good leadership from the start is making sure that good leaders are being promoted and hired based on a level of competency, whatever that competency is to do that job. I have been witness to organizations that have hired people into leadership roles, and then I come in and I'm doing a class, and they will talk about some of the things that there's being done at the highest level of their organization.
Right.
And I wonder, how does a person get into that role with lacking the competency to have basic leadership and communication skills? How does that happen? I mean, I don't understand how or why, other than maybe an explanation would be, I don't want to hire somebody that's better than smarter than me, because then they might make me look bad as I'm doing my leadership thing. So I'll hire somebody who is less competent than me, and that way I will always look better than them. And that's about the only reason, unless you're hiring someone's nephew or something. I don't know, but
Funny you say that.
Oh,
Seen that before, where hey, the chief and the guy's father, own hunting land together and have been best buds, and who gets the promotion? He's 15th on the list, but somehow he makes lieutenant. Like, for real player, or
yeah.
like you said, the Peter principle, just like rearing its ugly head. And you're right, what the situation you talked about was more poor leadership as far as ego, right? Like, I don't want somebody to outshine me. I got to be the biggest, the baddest. I got to know more than anybody else. So I'm going to, hire somebody who's not as, so I can, put my thumb on them. But there's a couple different ones. But, you can't ever rule out, good old boy network and nepotism to a certain degree in some industries. But Peter principle does rear its ugly head on occasion.
Yeah. I think another thing is that once somebody is promoted into a leadership role, that I think it's essential that that person develop a vision for where they want whatever, their unit or their division, depending on whatever they're the boss of, some vision of where they want that to be at some point in the future. In other words, establish a target that the people that are working for them can aim at.
Yeah.
And to I would say even involve the people who are going to have to achieve those goals, to reach that target, to accomplish that vision, to involve them in the planning process of making that vision. I think a vision is much easier to follow if a worker understands how and why that's important. In other words, like if the boss said, "Hey, I got a bus outside. Everybody get on the bus and we're going to go on a trip." Any questions? Well, you'd get like, "Well, where are we going? How long are we going to be gone? Or is there going to be food on the bus? Do I need to dress for hot and cold? Do I need to plan on an overnight stay?" And all these questions.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the boss will just say, "Get on the bus and trust me," versus let me lay down some good reasons as to why you might want to get on the bus and come on this ride, and what you're going to expect, and what challenges I see if you come along for the ride, and get those things out, discussed, and take away some of the angst about where's this boss or new boss or good leader taking us in this journey.
Yeah.
So the vision with a plan to help people. I'm not saying everyone's going to be like all raw about it, but they're much more likely, I think, to tolerate where the bus is going if they understand. The more they understand about the trip that the leader is trying to
100%. I mean, if you know the why behind it and what the purpose is, I mean, it's a whole lot easier to swallow even a bitter pill if you kind of understand the reasons why. And I remember this was a nonprofit organization, but let's just say their mission or vision was to help folks with disabilities, get gainfully employed, whatever. It was to help people, adults with disabilities. Say that was the mission. One of the things that they were having a lot of engagement issues, and one of the things I was really talking to the CEO about, I'm like, this is going to be a lot of work and a longer term thing, and you really need to get your HR department like knee deep into this, but you need to really drive this, is every single job description you have, from the accounts payable to the trash man to the janitor, to everything has to link back to helping people with disabilities. Like, okay, I send out the bills so we can get paid, so we can hire the counselors, we can work with the clients, so we can help people with disabilities, whatever. Like, every single job has to have that direct link. I do this job so we can if I didn't do this job, we couldn't do that mission. And that was to me, I thought that was really important for them to get everybody, like just what you said, that buy-in, that engagement, that, okay, I might not like it all the time, but at least I can understand why what I'm doing is important versus, I think this guy's just said, oh, well, I'm not on the engine company. So, my job as the, admin assistant here, the chief's admin assistant at the fire department isn't as valuable, but hey, you're making sure stuff gets done and the process gets, so, I mean, I always thought that was a really cool thing to kind of make sure to link the why behind it, just like you said.
Yeah. I think another thing that is a hallmark of a good leader is that they strive very diligently to put the need to be effective over the need to be popular. Because if you think about like the scales of justice, that can go up and down, you can be tremendously effective but very unpopular, or you can be very popular but tremendously ineffective. And I think the key for us as leaders is to make sure that we're being effective, but not at the risk of being popular. There's a saying that says, if you want to be popular, sell ice cream.
No.
Everybody likes ice cream. Well, I say everybody.
A lot of people
like ice cream. And I think that it's really important to realize as leaders that our role in this organization is to advance the organization from where it is to another place, whether that's more productivity or developing a better product or customer service or whatever the area is to take the effectiveness and continually improve upon it, not just be a passenger on the bus, so to speak, but to take it somewhere, to accomplish that vision. And sometimes that's not going to be popular with people who have become very comfortable in the status quo. And I think that organizations, when they bring in new leaders, whether they're promoted or whether they're hired from the outside, should have an ambition that leader is going to take that unit from where it's at and to a better place. And that better being more productive, more efficient, higher quality, whatever the focus is, that leader is going to do that. And attached to that is, I think, an important aspect of good leadership is having the courage to make changes.
Yeah.
Because making changes is difficult. There's again another old, catchy phrase that says the only one that really likes change is a wet baby.
Yeah.
And, other than that, or as I heard it, that the two things that you can say for sure is that people don't like the way things are and they don't like change. And so the role of the leader is one that requires a tremendous amount of courage to be able to identify areas that need to be improved and then work toward improving it, which also then means improving people.
Yes.
Assuming they supervise somebody, they're a leader of people, then leading those people to change the way they do things. So aligned to that, so if it's a three-pronged process of effectiveness over popularity, the courage to make changes would be the need to be a good mentor, a good teacher, a good role model for those that you're trying to inspire to do things in a different way. Lead by example. Show them how to do that. Proverbially, hold their hand when you know that what you're asking them to do is really scary because they don't know how to do it. You're asking them to do something they've never done before. And there's a lot of risk to that. I could fail. I can embarrass myself. There could be consequences. There can be a lot of reasons why people fear changing anything that they do, especially if they're in a comfortable routine of this is the way I've always done it. I come to work, and it's the same process every day, albeit that could be monotonous and boring, but it's also usually easy and predictable.
Exactly.
So now you're asking me to do something that isn't easy and isn't predictable, and it scares the heck out of me.
Yeah, well, I like how you talked about that kind of analogy of the scales of justice, because it's something, there's very few times, and I know you've seen this before, but there are slim amount of times somebody comes in, whether it's a new fire chief, a new CEO, a new leader, new whatever, and they've got a mandate from the council, they've got a mandate for the manager, they've got a mandate for the board, and basically you're the hatchet man, right? We're bringing you in for 2 years to make these changes, and then maybe you'll go away, and then we'll bring somebody else in more permanent, right? So we're bringing you in to be effective, and absolutely, we know that you're not going to be popular, because unless you have that type of mandate coming in, it's really hard to go General Sherman scorched earth and to make those kind of changes. Because what I took out of what you said, popularity, and I knew what you meant, because you're like, okay, well, Cole, I want to be your buddy, not the boss, and I'm not getting anything done. But to a certain degree, and this is why I think you kind of put a good pin in it when you were talking about the mentor part, is that if you go with the kind of the Maxwellism about leadership being influence, it's hard to influence somebody beyond the I can stand in between you and your paycheck if you don't have some degree of I have a respect for this person, whether you call it popularity or not. But that was the first thing that popped in my head when you said popularity was, okay, well, at least they like me enough, or they respect me enough, or they I'm able to influence them enough to where, like I said, the popularity is high enough to where I can influence them. I haven't just been a complete jerk, and like I said, they don't want to listen to anything I have to say. But same thing, we've got to have the courage to get things done too. So I think there's definitely that balance. And the first thing I thought about with the popularity part when you mentioned it was just the ability to influence others. And like I say, if you are mentoring somebody, that would be making it a lot easier because they get to know you a little bit better. It's not just to take the directive and go with it. And, it's, luckily the environment changed from, we're going to, and you'll know the analogy, some will miss it, but managing at the firehouse wasn't the same as managing on the fire ground, right? Eventually you realize, hey, you're dealing with people. You can't just, because I said so, do it now or else, pure compliance. Eventually you realize that, hey, wait a minute, maybe I got to take a different approach at the station than I do on here. And even then, one of the things that I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because I see this as fitting well into your program. Used to, was like, I give an order on the fire ground and you're going to do it, versus if I see a blatant safety thing, like I can say no, because maybe I see something you don't. At least I can bring that up to the attention. That was, I thought, a major leap forward on, yeah, you can say no if you see something that's a safety hazard that maybe the officer, maybe the chief, maybe whoever doesn't.
Yeah, I think that out there in the world, there, especially in like the first responder world, there are supervisors that say, if you think I'm making a mistake, I want you to point it out and I want you to tell me about it. And then the workers will be like, yeah, that's not going to happen, because I've already seen how you react when I bring up the slightest recommendation to do something differently than the way that you're doing it, and I see how you react.
Yep.
I was doing a program in California for wildland, and I did 2 days. One day I had the bosses,
right,
and then the next day I had the frontline, the workers, the line people. And so when I had the boss, I was doing the same program both days with, the one for the bosses had a little bit of a different spin than the one for the workers, because it's just a different view of situational awareness.
Yeah.
And when I got to the talking about having workers speak up if they think something isn't safe, the bosses said, Rich, that's one area you don't have to worry about. We drill into them. Speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, we'll just move on to the next slide then. I clicked onto the next slide, moved on. Well, the next day I had the workers.
Yeah.
And I said, interesting conversation I had yesterday with the bosses about speaking up. I said, so if you, the line workers, and most of them are in the range of like, I don't know if I would say 18. They might have been a little older than 18, but like 18 to 25. Okay, they're the young, hardworking, go get it, people that you want on the front line doing the heavy lifting.
Like, and they're stoked because they're a volunteer firefighter. They got chosen to be a smoke jumper. They go out to California wildline. They are, I knew one of those guys.
Yeah.
So, man.
I said, if if you thought that your line boss was making a mistake, how many of you would speak up and tell them they're making a mistake and stop what they're doing? And I had like 80 people in the room.
Right.
And like 8 hands went up out of 80. So just yesterday, the bosses told me, everybody would speak up. And then I had these like 8 hands go up. And I said, okay, I'm just curious because, we had this conversation yesterday and they said, you're all dialed in on this. And then all the hands, I said, okay, put your hands down. And then one person that had his hand up raised his hand again. And I said, well, what? Because I didn't ask another question. And he said, oh, I just wanted to clarify because I had my hand up that said I would speak up.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, it would depend on who I had to speak up to. So I want to qualify that I would speak up because it would depend on which person I had to speak up to. I have bosses that I would speak up to because I know that they would embrace my feedback and encourage it. And I have bosses that I know would become very angry and mean and vindictive toward me if I spoke up. He said, so I just want to qualify that. So I'm like, okay, so then that class. So at the end of the day, I get, some of the bosses back in. Like, how did today go? I said, oh, today went well, except for one area.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah. And they were stunned. The bosses were stunned that the workers didn't feel comfortable speaking up.
Well, it takes one time to take a smackdown. It only takes one time for you to say something crappy. Someone takes a smackdown, whatever, and then they're never going to say it again. But they say, "Oh, see what they did to Bill? I'm not doing that again."
Yeah. So to help those workers, to help their bosses, to help your listeners, on my website, which I'll give at the end, and it's a free resource, so I'm not trying to get anybody to buy.
And we'll have it in the description where they can connect and get
it's completely free, but they can go to my blog and search out the 5-step assertive statement process. And I didn't invent it; it come from aviation, and it's basically a 5-step process that somebody can talk through with a boss that they think is making a mistake, to try to get their concern out, but not in a way that's confrontational or will create a angry emotional response. It's a professional way to express a concern, and then it concludes with a recommendation. I think this isn't the right thing to do, but I think maybe we could consider, and then offer up some other route. Because the last thing I think a boss under stress wants to do is have somebody come up and say, well, this isn't going well, but not offer any alternative to what they're doing. You know, who needs that in the heat of battle?
Nobody. And sometimes it comes across as, look, we're here to do a job. We're on a time crunch. We're not managing by committee, right? I'm not trying to take a bunch of feedback and input like we would in a workshop. And it's like, no. Safety concern. I'm thinking this is, not going to work out real well. So there's got to be a good, solid process for, I can take the feedback, I get the recommendation, but also I want that because the first couple of times, they hear a cross word come out of my mouth other than thank you and I appreciate the comment. Then all of a sudden they're never going to do it again, and you're not going to. Now all of a sudden, instead of having eyes everywhere, you're back to being it. Like that's. And that's not a safe place to be.
Yeah.
But it kind of leads into the next question is, what was one of the biggest leadership challenges you've had to face?
Yeah, I put a lot of thought to this because, I've been in a leadership role for the biggest portion of my career, either at a company level or at a chief officer level or the fire chief level. I think the thing that I had the biggest challenge with was managing the pace of change, especially when I was new coming into the organization. So for context, I was hired in from the outside to be the fire chief in 2 different fire departments. Well, here's what I can say, and this is not going to come so surprise to anybody, I think, that if you're hired in from the outside, versus them just promoting somebody from the inside,
Right.
there's a reason.
Yes.
Something's broken. Something isn't working well. Something needs fixed. Internal people have too much baggage, or they're too invested in the way things are being done, and they don't think that somebody's going to, that the internal person is going to be able to take the organization to where the senior people think it should go. So they look to the outside to bring somebody in. So when somebody comes in from the outside, like I did 2 times, and in both cases, I can say I'm 2 for 2 with this, you quickly get inundated with people who have ideas or grievances for things that are broken and need to change and need to be done differently. And if you're supervising 50 people, 50 people have 50 ideas and 50 opinions about the things that need to change. And I didn't do this in my first organization, although I wish that I didn't. But when I came into my second organization, I literally got Post-it notes. And when I would meet with people and they would tell me, this needs to be fixed, this is broken, this isn't right, we've got to do this, I just started putting all those ideas on Post-it notes, and then I just put them on a wall in my office. And honestly, Dave, I wish I would have taken a picture of it, because there had to be somewhere in the range of 50 to 75 Post-it notes of all these things that people thought needed to be changed. So then I started to categorize them, what things were equipment changes, what things were training changes, what things were safety related, what things were communication related, kind of put them in their columns.
Yep.
But what I realized was there was enough change there to see me through 5 years of work.
Wow.
And I had better not try to change too much too fast, which was probably the biggest mistake of my first organization. Is I went in and I don't recommend this, Dave, but I became a 5 bugle fire chief at 28 years old.
Gotcha.
And I don't necessarily think that's the smartest thing to do. I mean, I had 10 years in the fire service. I had an MBA. I had good, solid corporate level leadership development and experience at a big company that I had worked for while I was serving as a volunteer firefighter. So I thought I had, what it took. But I had never actually full on been the leader of a fire department where I was the top person. And I came in and all these people with all these challenges. And I'm like, well, that's an easy fix. And we'll just do this. And that's an easy fix. And we'll just do this. And what I quickly realized is that when I implemented a change without understanding deeply why it was the way it was and why it hadn't been changed previously, but then I had this great idea about, man, that's an easy fix, we'll just do this. What I realized is when I fix one problem, I'd make 2 more. And when I'd fix those 2 problems, I'd make 4 more. And when I'd fix those 4 problems, I'd make 8 more.
Yep.
And I realized I need to slow my roll. And which was frustrating for some people, because there were some people in the organization who didn't want anything to change.
Right.
There were some people in the organization who wanted everything to change. And there were some people in the organization that just were along for the ride and saying, I'll just go with the flow and do whatever we do. I've been through 4 chiefs already. This will be the 5th one. I'll outlast him. So whatever he wants to do, I'll just, do it till he's not here. Yeah. They didn't expect me to stay 10 years. So those who gambled with that probably, didn't fare well. But I think the pace of change, and so like my first organization, I really was bad at that. I come in and tried to change too much too fast. I kind of saw it as like a sprint instead of a marathon. Got it. 10 years later, I went to my next organization, hired in from the outside, and I had learned from that. And I said, I really need to slow the pace of change. And yes, I even said to myself, I'm going to come into this organization, and on the first 30 days, there's going to be 50 things that people are going to tell me have to be changed or done differently, or we got to do this or do that. And instead of changing anything, I'm just going to take an inventory. And what really frustrated a whole bunch of people, including my bosses, is I resisted making any substantial changes for 6 months.
That's smart. I know a lot of people that do that.
Which then caused some of the people who were anxious for change to complain to my bosses around me. And that's another peeve is bypassing the chain of command. But in smaller communities, if you know somebody on the council, you go and talk to them because, they're your neighbor or your golfing buddy or whatever. Yeah. But, I got then some of my bosses saying, well, you're not doing anything. And I go, well, why would you say I'm not doing anything? Well, people are complaining about a lot of things that need change. We hired you to make a lot of changes, and you're not making a lot of changes. And I just say, well, because wisdom has taught me that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and I need to build credibility, and I need to build allegiances and alliances, and I need to get to know who are the people that I can depend upon to lead organizational change versus resist organizational change. And that takes a while to learn. I have to be a student of this organization for a period of time. How pompous it would be to think that I could come in here and in 30 days know everything that I need to know to change it. That was the mistake I made in my previous organization. And I don't plan on repeating that because that set a lot of bad things up in relationships with people. And I really come to realize that when those people are coming to me in the first 30 days, a lot of people have their ready for this, their own agendas.
No.
Yeah.
It ain't so.
They want things changed for their benefit, and they don't care if it adversely impacts 50 other people.
Exactly.
It needs to be this way for me. Well, then, so when I started taking Post-it notes and really just having listening sessions with people, it came to me that there were people that were selfish in their desires or demands for what needed to be changed that maybe weren't common themes among the broader masses.
Interesting.
But then some things came along that were the broader themes. When you interview 50 people and 25 or more of them say the same thing about something that isn't working well, and then you start paying attention and you see that what they're telling you is the truth. It really isn't working well. Well, then that Post-it note goes over on the, then I had a 1 to 5 priority list, one being, and I prioritized it by organizational impact and timeliness. How big of an impact and how fast does the change need to happen? So I kind of made this matrix, like a 4-quadrant matrix, very timely and high priority to not very timely and low priority. And I swear people probably thought I was some kind of analytical nerd. I really wasn't. I just knew that I didn't want to do it the same way that I did it the first time, and I needed to be more organized because all this need for change was all going to be flying at me from all these different angles. Not to even mention the fact that I didn't know the cliques and who liked who and who didn't like who and who was telling me this because they wanted to get even with somebody else, and all those things that are
all that crap,
all that human behavior stuff that I had to learn about people. Who can I trust, who can I not? And so then when the dust settled on that, I was better equipped to pace the change to deal with the things that were the highest priority, most timely items first.
Yeah.
And I was there. Oh gosh. I mean, I stayed at that organization 10 years as well, but it was probably 4 to 5 years before we started getting down to some of the ones that weren't quite as timely and quite as impactful to the organization. And some of those resolved on their own. That's another important lesson. You don't have to change everything. Sometimes things aren't changeable, or they'll find a way to resolve themselves without your involvement as the leader.
Yeah. One thing I picked up on that you mentioned is that for both places, you were there for 10 years. And so the second place, you had the intention of being there a decent amount of time. And so you needed to build the relationships, find the colleagues, to do the grunt work of networking and relationship building before you really started making changes. Where, say, if the council members or your bosses or whatever, like, hey, we want you to come in and make changes. Well, then you should have hired me as the hatchet man. Like, I'm not here to build relationships. I'm only here for 2 years to go scorched earth, make the changes, and bolt. I'm not here to build relationships. I'm not here to learn the community. I'm here to come in, do the will of the council, make these drastic changes. But that's why those hatchet men are literally, they're just there for 2 years, because they have no intentions of being there that long. And unless you're hired in that role and you're trying to get some longevity there like you did, that's a wise thing to do. Like, why is it being done this way? And are the conditions on the ground still the same as they were when we initially started doing that? And like you said, slow the roll and build the relationships first.
If any of the, I've worked for 3 different departments. If any of the councils would have ever told me, we just want you to, in 2 years, to clean house and be the hatchet man, I would have turned the job down, because I'm not the short term, turn the organization on its ear and walk away. I'm the see it through till it's institutionalized change person.
And that's why I stayed that's culture.
That's why I stayed both places for 10 years. And I had no intention of staying any less time. I mean, I don't know, I didn't have a magic, dart on the number 10, but I knew I was going to be there long enough to see the organization improve in a sustained way.
Yeah. Well, and we'll close this up. We'll close this segment up and we'll get to our last 2 questions. But I'd like to throw one final thought on that is, most of the time for the folks that do come in and they are one of those, hey, come in, upset the apple cart, run, because that's what they've hired you to do. A lot of times it's just like, perfect analogy, Sherman and the scorched earth. You've left a lot of damage there. Yeah, you made the changes, but man, it takes a while to recover from that. And normally I feel bad for the person who has to come in here and kind of repair all those relationships, all those things. Yeah, the changes got made, but that's not a pleasant experience to follow somebody like that and have to rebuild that from scratch.
No, because if you're the person that replaces that person, the trust is already destroyed, and they will not trust it. And then you're the new person coming in. It isn't about you. It's about the position you hold. Correct. They wouldn't trust the person who holds the next person in that position. They're not going to trust them. I don't care who they are.
Correct.
Because the person before them has done such a bad job. And in truth, I inherited that in my I was 3 organizations. The second one in, where I come in and made too many changes too fast, I inherited an organization that had a terrible, terrible leader.
Yeah.
Poor communicator. Status quo was just fine, which then made the organization lazy. The organization didn't want to change because they could do whatever they wanted to do under that leader. There was never any accountability, never any form of discipline.
Free reign, brother. Just have at it.
Yeah, and he was a very popular chief because they could really just do whatever they wanted to do, and he would never bring any accountability to. And then in comes me that says, no, we can't really do that. Do things that way. That's not even close to best practice.
Well, like I said, what kindergarten class doesn't like the teacher coming in just handing out ice cream and candy all the time and not asking you to do any work? I mean, come on, of course they're popular. I mean, like I said, you get away with murder, and I said candy and ice cream for everybody. But like I said, when it's time to, all right, you're in 1st grade now, boss, we got to start like doing some lessons. Like, I don't like this. Well,
right.
Of course not.
I like recess, not math class.
Yeah, well, those days are gone. Like Mr. Chief Recess just left.
Yeah,
Chief Math class just showed up. So that sounds like a great segment to close out this second segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. David. We'll be back with our final 2 questions and wrap up in just a moment. Welcome back to our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. David. We're here with Dr. Rich Gasaway, and we're going to jump into our final 2 questions. So, Rich, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
I might not have said the same thing previous to my lessons or learning the things I learned on situational awareness. But now that I have learned those and realized how much of a blind spot I personally had, it would be in the area of administrative situational awareness. So briefly, very briefly, the three
Okay.
component parts of situational awareness is perception, understanding, and prediction. So let me just quickly dial those into leadership.
No, please do.
Perception, the ability to see and hear what's happening around you, and not just your immediate surrounds, but the broader surrounds.
Right.
So paying attention, getting out of the office,
God forbid.
getting out on the shop floor. Oh gosh.
Oh, no, circles.
The management by wandering around guy from way back. What was his name?
I know who you're talking about.
Tom
Yeah.
Peters. Tom Peters, management by wandering around, perception of what's happening, understanding, making sense out of what you're seeing, not making it the sense that you want it to be, but understanding what the way it really is based on your perception. So perception, inputs, understanding, making sense out of what really is happening, what really is the problems. And then the third part, prediction, being able to anticipate outcomes of change that you're going to implement. You know, if you implement a change, you say, hey, everybody's going to like this. It's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
You're delusional. So being able to predict the successes and the challenges that would come from any amount of change that you're going to make in an organization. So implementing situational awareness principles into leadership practices, having a personal awareness and then a broader scale awareness, and then an understanding about the awareness of your coworkers, what we call shared awareness. In other words, if your understanding is the walls are blue, but your employees come in and say, no, it's really more like a teal, and the majority of them think it's teal, don't try to convince them it's blue. You have to adjust your understanding and say, okay, I can see from your angle with this lighting that is teal. And it's kind of a weird example.
Yeah, but I know what you're talking about. If you're not seeing everything the same.
Awareness of what others' situational awareness and understanding is as well. And that helps you have a jump off point as to where you can make changes and make fixes and improvements by understanding where other people are coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, this may be an oversimplification, but if you're the leader, you're thinking, hey, the situation is safe, and every single person that you're leading is like, it's not. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, they're like, I'm not going to follow you down there because I don't think it's safe. You know, oh no, everything's fine. Either A, you haven't built the trust, or B, you're not seeing what they're seeing.
Or if they blindly follow you into tragedy and you couldn't understand that they would do that because they're too afraid to speak up to you, then you're going to have a tragedy and you're going to say, why didn't anybody speak up? Well, they're not going to speak up if they don't have a relationship where they can trust you.
Yeah.
And that's on you for figuring that out in advance and establishing a way to build trust and camaraderie into your dealings with those that, you're going to depend upon to speak up.
Correct. You created this.
Speak up, but they ain't going to speak up unless they feel like it's a comfortable environment to speak up.
No, I had one guy that I love the guy's model. I think it's great. The guy was named Michael Mears. He was the chief people officer for the CIA, and he actually developed the CIA Leadership Academy. He had this great model I thought was great. I loved it. He told it a three-pronged type of thing. One, the base is psychological safety. People got to know that they can speak up. They can actually tell you something without getting their head bitten off. The next one is trust. So you can't do the trust without the psychological safety. But once they build the trust on top of the psychological safety, then the next one's going to be clarity. Clarity of the role, clarity of the mission, clarity of whatever. If you can build the psychological safety first, then the trust, and then the clarity, he said at that point, pour gasoline on it, man. Just push it to 100. I mean, you can do anything about it. He said, but those things have to be there, or it's just not going to work. And I was like, man, as far as dealing with people, I thought that was a great insight.
I agree.
Yeah, I was gonna say that one. That one I've referred back to him a couple times. I'm like, yeah, check out the interview. The guy was brilliant. But like I said, he obviously understands people from being a chief people officer and then being in that realm. But let's just say I'm pretty sure that from a psychological aspect, the CIA understands how people are wired and how they tick.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying.
I think that's really part of the very essence of what they do.
Just a bit, just a bit, probably. But quick question to kind of wrap it up. But what do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
I believe it's imperative upon a leader to never be comfortable with their knowledge and skills and abilities, and to be a continual learner, continual self-development, reading, taking classes, listening to podcasts, watching videos, listening to ebooks if they don't like to read. It should never end. It should be a continual cycle. Now, as I got better at leadership, I will never say I perfected it, but as I got better, when I would read a leadership book,
right,
the book might be 300 pages, and out of that, I gleaned 3 tips, 3 new things that I could do out of 300 pages,
right,
which is okay. I don't read, after I got fairly decent at my leadership skills, I didn't read a book to change everything that I do. I read a book to say what affirms the good things that I am doing,
right,
and what are the few things that I could improve upon. It's like when you take a class. You don't take a class and go back and completely change everything that you do. You take a class and you go back and you make 1 or 2 or 3 incremental changes based on something that you learned. And this continual self-development is a way of saying, my goal for me to be a better leader is
right.
incremental improvement. Nothing fast, nothing crazy, nothing flashy, slow, incremental change over time. I call it the orthodontist way of leadership development. If
I like that.
If an organization is not in good shape, which is to say the teeth are crooked, you don't go to the orthodontist and they don't take a pair of pliers and twist all the teeth straight. What they do is they apply some principles, in this case their hardware, and put some pressure on that hardware to create slow, subtle change over time.
Yep.
And then once the teeth are straight, then you put retainers on them because they want to go back to their previous shape, out of shape.
Yes.
So you got to put
almost guardrails up.
Boundaries and limitations and devices on it to make sure that they're going to continue to stay straight. Sleep with something in your mouth. I've never had braces, so I'm not. Yeah. Though I've paid for plenty of them. But that orthodontic level of change, of slow, steady, incremental change over time, and I also think that getting a mentor is a really viable thing for a leader to do, if for no other reason. Even if you're a great leader, having somebody that that isn't tied to your organization, so they're not connected to anybody, they don't know anybody in your organization, and it's a mentor who is willing to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Right.
And they're willing to give you raw feedback. Even if they think you're doing it wrong, they'll tell you, I actually think you're making a mistake here by doing it this way. Having that kind of mentor that you can turn to is extremely valuable. And I've had 3 or 4 of them, and a few of them are still in my life even to this day, even though I'm not formally in a leadership role other than in the organization I work with now. But having that leadership mentor is just golden. And then I think finally that I'll say to close is be very slow to judge and very quick to praise. When somebody makes mistakes, be slow to judge them. When they do things well, be quick to praise them. Because again, you're developing relationships over time. That if you're quick to judge, then every time somebody sees you, they're going to think, "Here comes my judgment." and then they're going to get tensed up, and they're going to be quiet, and they're not going to speak up. And so that would probably be my last one.
Nice. I really like that, the analogy of the orthodontist model of organizational change. Because when you first started going that road, I'm thinking like the Maxwellism, leaders are created in a crock pot, not a microwave. It's like you said, slow process over time, which I love that analogy, but that's more individual leadership development. And I could really picture, as long as it takes to change a culture, and then the culture wants to go back, and you have those retainers on until that's just the way we do things, stupid. Why would you ever consider doing it any other way? At that point, you throw the retainer away, you're done. Like, your job is done. Peace out. I can go and my work here is finished, right? But until that point gets it so ingrained that, of course, dude, but that's just the way we do things. Why would you ever consider elsewhere until it gets to that point? I like that orthodonture method of organizational change. I think that's a great analogy, and I think that's a good takeaway that a lot of folks can wrap their head around and hopefully use.
Let me say this too, David. I think in both of my organizations where I was hired in from the outside to be a change agent in those organizations,
right?
In both cases, I think it took about 7 years to get to where I thought we've made the turn and we're really doing some really amazing things now. All the cylinders are firing. The right people are in the right positions. The bus is going in the right direction. They understand the mission, the vision, the core values, and all cylinders are hitting.
Nice.
At about 7 years, which was good and bad. The good was that made my job very easy.
Yeah.
The bad was it also made my job very boring, which caused me then to look for my next opportunity.
I get it, but you're right. That's about right. It takes a long time to truly effectively change the culture in an organization. I think most people don't count the time. Like, how long is it going to take to actually do this, where it's going to be long-term sustainable change and it's not going to undo themselves. Like I said, they go the sedation dentistry route. All right, let's go ahead and put them under, crank all the teeth, and run, and realize that's long-term, that's just not going to work.
Well, the crock pot and microwave example, I've never heard that, but that is, and you said it was Maxwell. So
yeah, it was a Maxwellism. Leaders are made in a crock pot, not a microwave.
That's gold.
Yeah, you definitely use that one and have fun. But tell our listeners how they can connect with you, your company, both the website, LinkedIn, man. They're like, hey, I like this rich guy, man. How do I get me some more of this? How do they go about doing that? And we'll put all the stuff in the description as well.
The easiest way to find me is through my website. My organization is Situational Awareness Matters.
Okay.
The website is SA for Situational Awareness, SAMatters.com.
Okay. SAMatters.com. Gotcha.
Yep. And from there, I'm also on LinkedIn, and my Facebook is more like personal stuff, like family things and things like that. I do a little posting on Facebook, a little bit on X, but the majority of it is blogs on my website, podcast episodes on my website, and that's really the place. Like, if somebody wanted to reach out to me, there's a contact me tab on the website. So that really is like the hub to get access to everything that I have.
Cool. And the cool thing is, like you said, there's some free resources. We'll link all that down below. We'll make sure that they're able to have access to that, and we'll get that cut. But anyway, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate the insights. And we are going to wrap up this episode of Conversation on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and like I said, with our guest, Dr. Rich Gasaway. And we will see you all next time. Take care.